Hi, friends, and welcome. Thanks for joining us again today. On this adventure, we're headed back to bow camp, and by we, I mean Tina and myself. You see, if you're not a frequent flyer, you may not know that earlier in the fall, the gals kind of took over bow camp at Ryan Hopkins. Kim Dewey and Tina decided they were going to do some crossbow hunting instead of the guys, so we went out and Tina had a, well, let's call it a mishap. I think you missed.
I don't know what happened.
I don't know either. Did you get gone?
Yeah.
To say that left a bad taste in her mouth, well, that'd be a bit of an understatement. So, fast forward a couple of months, we're finally home off the road for a little while, and Tina tells me it's high time she took up her crossbow, headed back over to bow camp, and tried to get a little personal redemption and some venison for the freezer. Hey, I'm your host, Kyle Randall. This is my Wilderness Journal, and we're headed out to finish some unfinished business right now. A little rain mixed with a lot of wet snow was falling as T and I sat that first afternoon.
Deer. Looks like a doe. Working this way. Did you ask for this rain and snow?
And about an hour after those two moved off, some more deer started working their way down through the trees. There wasn't enough rain to keep us from hunting with a crossbow, at least not yet. Not that we'd actually seen a shooter or anything had come close enough. I had put out some corn and a few apple peels in hopes of drawing some deer in closer for Tina to get a good shot.
You can see some more.
But so far, nothing had ventured our way. We were just sitting there watching them work their way from east to west down through the trees. Once or twice my thoughts had wandered to a tree stand I had about 150 yards west of here. But I have to admit, in this rain and cold, I was pretty comfortable sitting in this blind. And I stayed pretty comfortable with that decision right up until I saw what looked like a pretty nice buck working his way out to the west toward that tree stand. So far, none of the deer had moved over, none of them had come our way. And seeing a pretty good buck working his way away from us, well, let's just say sometimes you just have to live with your choices. I did try grunting at him a little bit, but I don't think he even heard me.
Too far, I don't think he can hear us.
And that's the way it stayed until about a half hour later when the rain finally started to let up a little bit and we started to see a few deer actually working their way in at us. It was a doe and a fawn, followed by a dandy buck. There was a shooter, a dandy 3-year-old, looked like an 8-point, 17, 18 inches wide, nice and heavy. He had a couple of other little spike bucks with him, and they were all working their way right straight at Tina. They all came a ways, and then the big boy stopped and stood there. He just stared and stared. And then he finally calmed down and kept coming. This was definitely a shooter. Now all he needed to do was get sideways so Tina could have a decent angle for a shot.
Let him come closer, just relax.
The buck finally started to come broadside, and then he took a couple of steps and turned back. He seemed fixated on one particular doe, and she was just standing there staring back at him. And then all the other deer started getting real nervous. I looked over, and here came another buck, a gorgeous buck, down through the trees.
That's a good one.
This big 10-point came marching right straight in, and then circled in behind that same doe and took her right back out through the trees the way he'd come. And the other buck followed right out after him. Poor Tina, she had gotten so close, only to see it evaporate right in front of her eyes. Two nice bucks and still no shot. That's the way it is when you're archery hunting. You can be in the right place. You can even get a buck into range, but if he doesn't turn and give you the right angle, like I always say, close just won't be close enough. It's one of the things that makes it exciting, but it's also frustrating, and I have to tell you, I was beginning to wonder how long Tina would hold out. Her head cold was making her miserable. I was thinking, you know, sooner or later she's going to want to call this enough.
Hey, little Red Hood. How you doing?
Okay.
Yeah. Day 2, part 2. Today the day.
Depends on if I start coughing.
Yeah, I got a little bit of head cold, huh?
We were back in the same blind, and for the moment the best I could say was, hey, it wasn't raining. We did see one small deer work its way past us to the east. It never turned and came in, just slowly worked its way down along the side of the blind. She did stop and stare back the way she'd come, and we watched and watched, but we never did see any deer following her. And then, about 20 minutes later, the birds flew off. A couple of fawns were working their way in toward the blind. We sat there quietly watching them nibble on the apple peels until Tina noticed there were some more deer working their way in.
I count 3 or 4 does and 1 little buck.
There appeared to be 3 or 4 does and fawns and what looked like at least one small buck, and they appeared to be heading pretty much right at us.
There's a bunch more deer coming behind.
And not far behind that first group, several more deer were working their way, slowly kind of looping in. And then, for whatever reason, one of the small bucks turned and started walking straight at the blind. We hadn't seen any shooters yet, but it was definitely nice to be seeing some activity, some deer moving around close by. It's hard to sit for hours and hours and see nothing. Just a few deer will keep you up on the edge of your seat and paying attention, and really that's what you need to do. The deer were definitely being cautious, but sooner or later they all worked in and started to feed. And not long after the first group got in, we noticed another doe working her way in with a button buck. And then, just as that button buck got to within about 40 yards, he pulled up short, turned around and looked behind him. There was a dandy buck, shadowing in that doe just off to her left, working his way in. He worked his way up closer and started scent checking some of the does, pushing some of the small bucks out of the way. And then he stopped and looked over to his right, and there was another buck just standing there. We hadn't even noticed it. I don't know where he came from. He was just there. We had been so fixated on that first buck, we hadn't even seen this 8-pointer show up. And then when the first buck moved off with a doe, that second deer started coming in. At least we weren't going to have a standoff. One of the bucks was coming. I whispered to T, if he gets in here, you go ahead and take a run at him. Now we were down to it. All we needed was for this buck to get a little bit clear. Just get out of the trees. He was well within range. We just needed that angle. The buck eased in even a few steps closer for Tina, and then he backed up. He actually turned around and walked back out a couple of steps. There was another doe coming in, and she seemed to be commanding his undivided attention. He stood there watching her as she slowly worked in, and he kept standing there, right up until another small buck started heading in toward that doe, and that's all it took. He went out to follow that doe. She stopped for just a second to look back as if to say, well, are you coming? And then both of them worked their way right back out into the woods. Tina was definitely beginning to feel the pinch. We were seeing lots of good deer, a couple of shooter bucks, but she just couldn't get them to stand still long enough to get a decent shot. The rut, even the tail end of it, keeps bucks up and moving, and that's a blessing. But any archery hunter will tell you, when they don't stand still for long, it's tough to get on them. And Tina had already had a miss on this hunt. She wasn't going to let that happen again. We were just going to have to wait. And on top of that, we had a weather change predicted for the next couple of days. The wind was going to turn 180 degrees. We not only needed a little luck, we needed to move. With over a dozen stands spread across 1,000 acres, it wasn't a matter of could we move, it was more of a question, where should we move? I decided we'd set up on the edge of a food plot, and we did see one deer right after getting in there, but unfortunately for the next hour, we didn't see much of anything. And then, just as the sun started to settle behind the trees, a couple of youngsters were working their way in toward the green field. One of them, a small 6 or 7 point, a nice 1.5 or maybe a 2.5-year-old deer, walked right out in front of us. Certainly not a shooter yet. He was making me think this was a pretty good stand choice. And then, when I saw not one but 2 shooter bucks following a doe down through the trees headed toward our field, I was absolutely sure of it.
Looks like a shooter. It's coming up that road. Yep, definitely a shooter. Might be 2 of them.
Of course.
Yep, might be 2 shooters.
Tina sat holding her breath and then looked over. Another big buck was working his way out, and we'd seen this big boy before. He stopped, worked a scrape a little bit, and then came marching straight in. If all 3 of those bucks made it out here in front of Tina, she was going to have 3 shooters out in the field. And all she needed was for one of them, any of them, to get closer. Unfortunately, they didn't. That big boy came out, took possession of the doe that those other 2 bucks had been following, and run the whole mess right back out of the field. It's like I said, when it comes to an archery hunt, the rut giveth, and the rut taketh away. And when those bucks turned and chased that doe out of the green field, I thought Tina was going to scream. Still, she didn't complain, she didn't quit, she just blew her nose, sniffled a little bit, and we went back to hunting. I've said it 1,000 times, friends. There is no quit in our outfit, and that goes double for Tina. It took over an hour before we saw another deer. A doe and a fawn came working their way out into the food plot. They did work right out in front of us, right up close to the blind. And following them was a buck. Well, at least a buck starter kit, and he too came working his way right up past the side of Tina's blind. This was a good thing only in so much if other deer, say older, larger deer, were to follow that same path, they'd put themselves right in Tina's wheelhouse. That is, of course, if we didn't spook any of these other deer as they went by. See, that's part of the process, part of the hunt, especially in an archery hunt. If you spook any of the little deer, you never get to see any of the older ones. In order to succeed, you have to suffer this crucible. You have to just sit there and be quiet and wait. Now, that's not to say there wasn't any entertainment. These two small bucks were throwing down right out in front of Tina. And they kept at it until a little bit larger buck came by and put a stop to them. There were deer moving all over around the edge of the food plot. Now all Tina really needed was for one of the older bucks, a shooter, to work his way across, get out in front of her. We were definitely in a good place. We had deer moving by, plenty of them within range. All we really needed was that one chance. And I was still holding out hope she was going to get that chance. But I have to tell you, I was also beginning to worry it was getting more than a little dark. If that big buck was coming, he better get to getting here. And then, out in the food plot, a good buck did circle a doe. This was definitely a mature deer, a 3-year-old. Unfortunately, he was going the wrong way. Tina and I sat there for long minutes just watching this little guy feeding outside the window, until finally he too wandered off back into the woods. We'd seen a lot of deer, but it was getting really dark. I figured it was over until I heard Tina catch her breath. That big buck, the one that had been chasing the doe around out in the field, had worked his way up in front of us, and he was standing there. He was within range. There was plenty of light. He just needed to turn a little, for pity's sake.
Yep. Top dot, right on the chest. He's ankling in. Wait.
Tina held it for what must have seemed like forever, and then finally, ever so slowly, the buck turned a little bit.
All right. Shoot him if you're ready.
And now it was on Tina.
Nailed him. Watch him. There he goes. Oh, he stopped right there. Boy, it looked good. It looked like a double. I think you got that one, baby. You definitely hit that one. Nice job.
Oh.
Way to hold your stuff together. Talk about danger, danger. We had deer coming by.
Oh.
What do you think?
Oh, help.
Yeah. What do you think? Look here.
Help.
Yeah. I can see your bolt sticking on the ground down there.
Right there. Oh.
Pass through. We'll give him a second, and then we'll go look here before it gets dark, okay?
That's nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it is.
That, friends, was an awesome shot on a great deer, but the drama wasn't quite over, not just yet. We still had to get down. Tina had to follow the trail and find her prize. It was the hunt after the hunt. And if you're an archer, well, you know exactly what I mean. Pass through.
Yep.
All the way down?
All
Good deal. little better looking than last time.
Uh-huh.
All right, well, let's go see. Oh, yeah.
Drop there.
Okay. What? Huh?
There he is, right there.
Yes, he is. Why don't you? I don't think he's taking a nap, girl. Before we run out of light, why don't you go get a hold of that? Nice job. You're pretty lethal for a grandma. That is a buck.
Whew.
Yeah, careful. It might be a little messy. We're running out of look at that. That is a buck, girl. Awesome. Now, hey, I'll tell you what. Let me throw you your hat so we can see your lovely face a little better. You look like a little what's-her-face Riding Hood there. That's an awesome buck, girl.
Oh, a little head hair.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's all right if that's what you get with it. What do you think?
Oh, he's beautiful. Look at that. Gorgeous.
Look at that. That is just a big old 3-year-old, just exactly what we were looking for. I got to ask you 2 questions. Is that worth passing all them younger bucks waiting on a bigger one?
Yeah.
Pretty exciting. And one more really important question. How's that redemption feel now?
Fantastic.
Doesn't it? You took a little bit of licking for missing, but you know it happens to all of us. Even they may see in the near future it happens to all those people I hear. Congratulations, love. That is a gorgeous deer. You made a perfect shot.
Thank you.
Deer didn't go, what, 40 yards? That was absolutely gorgeous. I couldn't be happier for you. How do you feel?
I feel great.
Congratulations, Tina. An awesome shot on a great buck. You followed it up. You didn't make it 40 yards. Girl, you have every right and reason to be both proud and relieved. Friends, that's how it is in the real world. You miss, you hit, eat, and be eaten. That's the reality of what we do. And no one always wins. I truly believe that if you haven't missed, you haven't hunted. I myself have missed more critters than most people will ever shoot at. It's part of the reality. It's part of the excitement and the challenge in this world. And I know that nothing and no one always prevails. I honestly believe that's the way the good Lord intended it. Hey, I hope we see some of you out there taking your chances. I hope you're hitting a big old good one and finding it. And if we do see you out there, well, you know we're going to stop and share a cup and a fire. And if we don't see you out there, friends, well, then I'll wait for you right back here so we can share another adventure from my Wilderness Journal.